please come forward, the next panel. You will introduce them, I guess, Aaron. Please step forward.
All right, so that is context. We've got a wonderful panel to kind of dive into some of the land use issues.
I'm Alexandra Tinsman. I'm the regional head for NEM, and NEM is an out-of-the-box solution for enterprises that are looking to build on the blockchain. I work for the NEM Foundation as an advisor and also an advocate.
Hi, my name is Andrea Leiter. I am from an academic background, mainly in international law, investment law, and development studies. And I have a purely research interest in blockchain, but the issue of land registration is a big one when it comes to development and international law and law in general. So I'm very excited to be discussing this.
My name is Benedetta Audia, and I'm a corporate legal advisor with the United Nations Office for Project Services. I am one of the authors of the book and very passionate about this topic. I still remember when Koen and I started discussing the idea of writing a book on the legal aspects of blockchain. So being here today is really an honor. I look at this topic from two different perspectives. Obviously, as I said, I work for UNOPS, but I'm also part of the academic world. I teach procurement in international development at GW.
Good afternoon. My name is Baloko Makala. I work for the World Bank, specifically for the Technology Innovation Lab that is housed within our corporate IT department. I'm one of the co-authors of the chapter that we contributed to this, the publication that was presented today. My other colleague, Ansha Lanan, unfortunately couldn't make it today, so I'll cover up for her as well.
I think I kind of teed this up a little bit, but in your view, so I just gave you my perspective on some of the possibilities for blockchain when it comes to land use or land title management. What's your views? What are you thinking? What are you seeing?
In terms of what the technology could do in the area of land administration, what we did, by the way, let me just get back to this sense of our writing. So at the level of the Technology Innovation Lab, what we did is we developed 3 proof of concepts that depicts three most common processes in land administration. That is for the first registration of a parcel without prior record. The second area was the transfer of ownership, so basically transfer of titles. And the third area was what we call virtual authentication or notarization, basically when somebody wants to go to a notary. So we noticed that blockchain could indeed help the process of land administration, these processes. There's a number of aspects that could be talked about. For instance, the aspect of immutability of records. This is something that should definitely add to what's happening at the moment. Land is one of the top 3 most corrupt sector. So the aspect of immutability definitely would be something that would add value. The perceived as well security of the technology, the security that comes with blockchain. And then other things that we also noticed is that with the immutability of records, blockchain technology could also sort of promote the rights of those who are the most disenfranchised, such as women and other vulnerable groups. So that's what I could talk about at the moment. I'm pretty sure that my colleague would have something else to add.
I was mentioning earlier during the speech on what is the UN perspective on blockchain, and I was mentioning the example in Haiti, and of course when the disaster struck in 2010, a lot of efforts and reconstruction projects were significantly delayed, and today many projects have not yet been implemented because people are still trying to figure out whose land is whose. So again, there could be significant benefits associated with the introduction of a blockchain-based land registry, as you were just mentioning now. This area is certainly affected by corrupt practices all over the world. It is the marginalized people that seem to suffer the most about, given the lack of a transparent system. there are significant challenges associated with the introduction of land-based registry, but and we'll talk about those, I'm sure, in a second. But at this stage, from a development perspective, especially given the challenging environments where we operate and the frequency of natural disasters and how these affect local populations, the potential advantages of blockchain-based land registries could be huge.
So I would say to the perspective of the benefits of having land registration, I think there are two very different cases that one can think of. One is the idea of formalizing informal property that has not yet had a formal status in any way, which is much more the question in development thinking, and people like Hernando de Soto have been suggesting that since the 90s. So in a sense, blockchain is a tool that now comes to a conversation that is not new. It's a tool that can do something that has been discussed before, and challenges to that have been raised before. So what happens if you formalize an informal property holding? You also distribute, basically. So you make decisions there. It's not that you simply take something that already exists and then put it into code. So there is that idea to it, and I think then there's a different question if you have a registry already existing and then you literally try to simply just move it onto code. So I would add to this conversation that I think that governments who are introducing blockchain for doing land registration in a development context should think about what is the expected outcome of this, what does the formalization do in terms of distribution of rights, distribution of wealth in whatever particular community that is happening.
I think for land registry and blockchain, it can be a non-violent way, a non-violent solution to enforce property and contracts. So I think that's pretty interesting. On emerging trends that I see, NEM has a pilot right now with UTP. It's blockchain for Indian country. And I think what's interesting is that the Crow tribe is using this as a e-governance, and they have built in a mobile wallet that has land registries so that they can prove land verification, and it's attached to their blockchain ID. They have a wallet, they have voting, so they can vote on land initiatives as well. So I think these kinds of pilots are pretty interesting, but there are challenges as they stated before, but for me it's hope that we'll have more transparency into the complete process and that it can stretch globally, and that at some point we'll have a governance that will be accepted by many borders.
I think the formalization piece is interesting, and I think it ties into the point about corruption. So if there's going to be a process of either translating existing systems into blockchain-based systems or recapturing otherwise or previously uncaptured parcels of property, how does it solve for corruption at all? I mean, that's a completely separate issue, and I think that that's one of the real limitations, is that there's no real solution for that yet. So great, we formalize something in a way that hurts people, or already has, it's been formalized by folks that are corrupt off the bat, and people have been stripped of rights. And blockchains are not going to really solve that in any type of way. So does that just mean that this is a fool's errand, or is there a way that we can address that?
I mean, I think one of the spontaneous questions that I would raise, and in this regard as well, is how, what kind of, so I am not a coder, I have not the tech background, so I wonder what kind of legal forms does the code hold? So what kind of flexible forms of specific bundle of rights ideas of property are possible there, and who are we going to charge with doing that, and how do I now say we, as if I was a government, but who am I as a government going to charge with that, and how can I know that is actually going to go down the way that I imagine? So there's, I think, a lot of translation that happens at many steps.
Yeah, and I think more broadly, I mean, I think it's important. Listen, there's lots of possibilities. So it's one of these chicken or egg problems. So if every system, there was no transaction cost, there was none of these challenges in terms of converting them into blockchain-based systems, this would be a great potential use case. But how do we get there? What are some of the other challenges beyond what we discussed so far that you think may limit the ability for this to get deployed in any meaningful way?
Again, technology can't be effective if used in isolation. So again, it can be seen, blockchain can be seen as a cure to every problem associated with land rights in weak jurisdictions. So again, it's very important to make sure that there is full coordination, that there are capacity building exercises that are also undertaken, especially targeting government officials. Another challenge, you mentioned it earlier, Aaron, is about the accuracy or the completeness of the data, in the sense that if the data is incorrect and then is put on the blockchain, then there is nothing that will validate the authenticity or the accuracy again of that data. So I mean, so that's another aspect to consider. Something else I'd like to mention relates to enforcement. Again, linked to the argument about weak institutions. And again, blockchain can certainly solve a number of issues, but sometimes, the same information that could be put on a piece of paper may not have a different meaning if put on the blockchain. I'm just going to make another point, and then I'm going to give the mic to other colleagues. Finally, what I wanted to say is that there is a risk to have parallel systems in the same jurisdiction, and that's what we are seeing, for instance, in Ghana, with a number of companies that are trying to basically make their blockchain system as the legitimate one in relation to land rights. And again, the possibility that marginalized people be penalized in this process once records are put on the blockchain.
Yeah, I want to jump on that just for a second. That's such a great point. And in addition to that, I think the power struggles with some of these companies that are building in parallel, no one wants to have their system left behind, right? So to give up that power is going to be difficult. And with technology, any technology company is going to have to work with regulators, and that means they're going to have to make compromises. So you're dealing with power struggles in addition to regulations and compromises. And so I don't see that this is actually going to be an effect for years to come. I look at Twitter and I look at Facebook and YouTube and social sites that have been around for over 10 years, and I look at all the issues just trying to manage regulations with that. Now amplify that with land registry. This is something that is being piloted now and explored, but not put into implementation.
Perhaps the last point on this one is because you made reference to the case of corruption and the sort of issues that you could find outside of the blockchain. This is the very reason why when we developed this proof of concept, we called it the first registration of a parcel. That means a parcel that has no prior record. These issues are often referred to as off-chain issues, off-chain challenges if you want. And whether we do have a solution in terms of how to address them, at this point I would say we don't have any as yet in sight, but we know as well that blockchain is much more powerful, at least the technology will be much more powerful when used in combination with other technologies such as artificial intelligence or IoT. Now, how can we use these other technologies creatively in such a way that we could potentially verify some of these off-chain data, off-chain issues, is something yet to be tested.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I guess the other thought about these parallel systems, we had this in the US, it was called MERS, basically private companies, the banks and other organizations created a private electronic registry for land title. 2008 or 2007, 2008 crisis hit. It created a huge amount of chaos in terms of being able to foreclose on properties and administer rights here in the U.S. So, I think that kind of highlights that we're going down a similar path unless there's government support for it. But we have 2 more minutes and I want to just open it up. But let's suspend all skepticism. And sometimes that's difficult, but let's do it. And assume that this all works. What will that mean in terms of international collaboration, or what types of systems will have to be put in place to fulfill this vision of having property transfer seamlessly, potentially across jurisdictional lines?
If everything goes well. So first of all, I think that it's very difficult to start talking about the benefits without trying to see what kind of environment do we need to have put together before we can really launch this technology into the real world. So I'll think about the legal frameworks around blockchain. At this point, really, there's yet to be some sort of coherence across the world as far as how blockchain should be treated. How does it fit within the current legal frameworks? The other thing that I wanted I just wanted to illustrate the kind of challenges, for instance, that I know that you said we have to talk about the positive, but as much as blockchain could help in enhancing, for instance, the rights of the disenfranchised, the vulnerable groups, but say, for instance, if a blockchain solution in the space of land administration was to be deployed, let's assume in Africa, where we know that 90% of land is under customary tenure, and we have to consider customary law in the context of blockchain, and we know that customary law to a certain degree can have certain impacts on people like women, like the vulnerable groups. So what would happen if the data that currently exists is placed on the blockchain? What does it mean in terms of the rights of these people who are already disenfranchised? Is it going to go for the worst, or is it going to go for an improved stage? Those are questions that need to be thought about.
I think with regards to what kind of jurisdictional framework can work for that, I think it's interesting to think that mostly startups that work around dispute resolution on the blockchain have ideas that say, well, national courts are really not so well suited to deal with these issues because they don't understand blockchain, they cannot read code, they don't know what exactly happened, they don't know what was encoded. So there is a big push towards having something like a transnational arbitration system that could handle that better. I think with land registry we are very close to national jurisdiction, so I think that there is something to be said about how that would tie into that. But I think in general, in order not to reinvent the wheel, one of the things that one can think of is the experience with commercial arbitration, international commercial arbitration or international investment arbitration, which are regimes that came exactly out of this idea that you have a global enforcement mechanism, you have an international convention that secures that, and you have ad hoc arbitral tribunals that adjudicate upon this. So then the question becomes, is that something that one wants? Is that who does one charge with the task of adjudicating if you have that kind of form of arbitration, if you take it out of the national jurisdiction? So I think all these questions are questions of legal design that go into how one sets up the contract in the first place and have big gravitas.
I just want to mention something because you said that it's mostly within the national legal framework, but we know that in a number of countries around the world there's a situation of land grab, where you see multinationals coming and taking over traditional lands. So these are kind of cases that we really need to think about if, let's say, blockchain was to be introduced in such type of environment. How do we address such type of problems?
All right, so I think lots of potential possibilities, lots of downsides, and potentially even new international treaties that may need to be implemented in order for this to be fulfilled. All right, well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panelists.